Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's Alexia. As you may know, I've been studying in Singapore, and ever since I moved and have been documenting my vlogs on here since 2024, my most asked question is how to look for student accommodation in Singapore. And rightfully so, because ever since I've moved, it was the number one question on my head, on my parents' head. It was something that we worried a lot about and were quite confused, honestly. But after having been through that and looking at all of the apartments, dealing with agents, contract rules, I feel as though I've gathered quite a bit of information, which I'm gonna now share with you through this video. So before you sign that lease, make sure you watch this video and watch it till the end, because I'll be sharing a lot of information on the Singapore rental market, dealing with agents, roommates, contract rules, all of that stuff. So without further ado, let's get to it. And I have my laptop right here so that I don't miss out on saying anything important. So let's begin. Now I'm going to divide this video into a bunch of different parts, and hopefully that will help you figure out exactly what kind of information you're looking for, and let's do it in a step-by-step manner, really. We're going to start with understanding some key terms which are very important to understanding the Singapore rental landscape, and I'll take you through all of these terms that you're going to come across whenever you look at a property listing, just so that you know what you're in for if you choose to rent such an apartment. So beginning with, the number one thing that comes to mind is HDB. Now HDB housing basically stands for Housing Development Board. It's, as it says, Singapore's Housing Development Board, so it's government run housing and it's extremely common in Singapore. It's public housing, so around 80% of all Singaporean residents live here. Now when you might think of government housing in India, you might have a very, barely meets the standard or extremely base model of housing that you might have in mind. But don't be fooled by this, because in Singapore these housing estates are very well planned, well organized, well managed, and as goes with everything else in Singapore, they are extremely safe. Now, one of the biggest advantages about living in an HDB would be that because they're government planned, they planned in such a way that amenities are very nearby. So if you think about transport, if you think about, public transport, like the metros or the bus stations, HDBs are very often very nearby to all of these, as well as hawker stalls, which is, Singapore's food scene, as well as the local food courts. HDBs are typically very close to all these areas, and for a student, having access to cheap transport and cheap food is very important. So this is something that you could keep in mind. And besides this, I would say that most students also do prefer to live in HDBs because they offer a very good value for money. Now, one trade-off is that because this is government subsidized housing, it's the base model that you could go for, which means that it won't be a gated community and they won't have any amenities such as pools or badminton courts, saunas, whatever. No gyms either. But I would say that on the gated community point, safety, Singapore is extremely safe. So if you feel as though you're a little bit unsure about whether you want to go for an HDB, given that they might not have security stationed all the time, I'm gonna say that it's definitely not a must-have, and you'll be perfectly safe and fine most of the times. As well as if you really do want to visit amenities like a swimming pool or a gym, you can very easily go to one of the community centers. They're scattered around everywhere, and they are typically very close to wherever the HDB estates are. So the next housing option, very common, is a condominium, and it's also referred to as a condo. Very often you'll see that. Now these are private residential developments, and these ones do have other facilities such as gyms, pools, badminton courts, squash courts. They might even have karaoke rooms, saunas. They do come with, I believe, 24/7 security. So these are gated communities, and you typically have an access card for you to be able to enter. So of course, with a higher price comes once again an upgraded sense of amenities and privileges that you're afforded. So one trade-off that I do want to highlight here is that because these are private residential developments, a lot of these condos tend to be located a little bit further away from more public amenities like the transport, like bus stations, metro stations, also the hawker centers, Generally, they tend to be a little bit further away, but you might still be able to find something close by. But that's the general trend, I would say. And then you have landed properties. So while HDBs and condos are skyrise apartments, a landed property is a house on land. And examples would be, bungalows, anything with a terrace and a roof. But I would say that these are very rare in Singapore to be rented out, and extremely rare for students to rent them out too, because Singapore is extremely small, right? So having the land for this kind of thing is extremely rare, and as a result it's also super expensive. So not a lot of students go in for these because they're really expensive. Yeah, that's the bottom line. And then the fourth type of housing that you might do is having co-living spaces. So these are very common in condos. Typically it's where you have a service provider, an operator, who will offer a furnished room for you, and it also has very flexible contracts. So typically this might mean that you have a room in an apartment of maybe 6 rooms, or maybe even fewer, but it's not dorms. It's like everybody has their own room, and then you of course share your common areas like a bathroom as well as the kitchen. And because these are run by service providers, your utilities, Wi-Fi's, cleaning of the common areas, by common areas I mean like the bathroom and the kitchen, all of that would be included. And examples of some service providers for co-living situations would be Cove, Colibri, and also Hamlet. So because of this kind of service providers, cleaning offered kind of setup, they are a lot more convenient, but they're also going to be expensive. That's the trade. And then we have serviced apartments, which are basically fully furnished apartments, and they offer like hotel-like services. So think about, you'll have a chef cooking for you, you might have somebody cleaning for you, all sorts of things. But people typically go for these for short stays, not students, because again, it's really expensive. So that kind of covers the 5 main types of housing types that you might see. You also have dorms, but I don't think it's very common for students to get these, because it's as though you just have a bunk in a dormitory, and then you have a lot of shared spaces, like a shared studying space, the bathroom. I don't think you have a kitchen, you instead have a mess. But in my experience, not a lot of students go for these, but that's just what I've observed. Maybe you can check that out if that's something that you're interested in. So that brings us to the close for the different types of housing and apartments, and let's now talk about other common terminology. So firstly, we have the common room. What this means is that it's a very standard bedroom. So if you're renting a common room, you're only renting a bedroom and you don't have a bathroom attached. You're gonna have to share a bathroom. So that's what we call a common room, and that's what we call a common bathroom. A common bathroom is one which is shared by multiple people. And then you have a little bit upgraded the master bedroom, which even in India the master bedroom is one which has your bed in a bedroom and an attached bathroom. So here this means that the bathroom is only private to you and nobody else will use it. So we also have, of course, a studio apartment, which basically means that you have your bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and you have the whole apartment to yourself. So I would say studios are of course the most convenient, but they're also going to be pricey. So those are the trade-offs, and that's it for the main types of accommodation. Part 2 is what does the accommodation cost? Of course, a very important factor in deciding, and I won't sugarcoat it. Singapore rentals are expensive, and for students, I'm gonna say, even for me, it took the biggest chunk of my monthly allowance. I would say like more than 50% of my monthly expenses went to paying the rent, and yeah, that's just the reality of being in Singapore. So in my experience now, I was renting in Singapore all the way from 2024 to 2025 end. So I'm gonna kind of give you an idea about what the prices were when I was looking, and then of course adjust a little bit because, well, as the years have gone by, things have gotten a lot more expensive. So when I was searching, a common room was costing around 800 to 1800 Singapore dollars. The reason why there is such a big range is because I told you all the different options, right? If you're in an HDB and you only have a common room, and it's meaning that it's without a bathroom, it's going to be on the lower end, like think 800. But if you're in a condominium, then you might very well be paying 1800 and upwards, because you're also paying for all the amenities of the condominium, such as, you know, the pools, the security, the gym, all sorts of stuff. Now a master bedroom, which means that you have your own attached bathroom at, you know, either of these options, would be anywhere ranging from 1600 SGD perhaps in an HDB to even 2500 SGD onwards in a condominium perhaps. A studio apartment starts at the very least at 2000, and I would say that studios are, I want to say, exclusively found in condominiums. They're very rare to be found in HDBs, and they can be anywhere from 2000 to 4000. Of course, depends on the location as well, right? And for a co-living space, I'm gonna say it's between 1500 to 3000 Singapore dollars. And the reason why there's such a, you know, wide range in these prices is because location, access to transport points, the age of the property, like how far back was it built, the facilities, the proximity to, well, schools, proximity to shopping malls, hawker centers, all of these will affect the price. If you want to know what other costs in Singapore are, so that, you know, maybe you can decide whether you want to stretch your budget a little bit for the housing, I'm going to say that you can budget around 50 to 150 per month for your utilities. Now, also depends. Sometimes your contract is inclusive of these utilities. When I say utilities, I mean Wi-Fi, water, electricity, that kind of stuff. And it will all depend upon your, you know, how much you're going to be using the air conditioning, because Singapore is a really hot country. It rains all the time, it's sunny also all the time, and all of this will depend. So let's say if your rent is high but it's all inclusive utilities, that's a really good deal. Otherwise, you know, they might charge you by the meter. Part 3 is understanding Singapore rental contracts and terminology. So this is very important, I would say. Understand your contract, pay attention. If you have any doubts, you know, always ask somebody who's aware of them. I think if there's an agent involved, of course ask the agent, or, you know, even go back to your landlord. Just, you have the right to ask questions and make use of it. Don't go into anything blindly. So always read the contract carefully, and these are a few terms that you might see. The first one is minimum lease period. That means that for some landlords, they're going to ask that you rent out the property or enter into a contract for, you know, an X number of months. For an HDB, I want to say that it is illegal to have a contract lower than 6 months, which means that if you're even wanting to, you know, rent an HDB, your contract duration on paper has to be 6 months onwards. And some landlords will even say no when you know, apply for 6 months, because it's in their best interest to have a longer term tenant staying there. Like, think about 1 year or 2 year leases are very common. So private properties like the condominiums, condos, they do prefer 12 months, and most landlords do prefer, you know, a longer leasing period. So I'm gonna say, if you're gonna, you know, put in an offer for a property, have a longer leasing period. And then the other thing is utilities. Like I said, you have to always ask, never assume. So ask your landlord, is electricity included, is water included, is Wi-Fi included, or are these all expenses that you're gonna have to look after yourself? Like, what about the gas service, right? And then air conditioning rules, right? So air conditioning is going to contribute quite a bit to your electricity bill, and that is why landlords usually have some sort of cap about electricity usage. Like, some landlords in your rental contract, they might specify that there's a maximum hours a day that you can use the aircon for, or if let's say that the aircon use is only between 6 p.m. to 12 a.m. in the night time. And it's also very common for landlords to demand in your rental contract that you service your aircon every, I think, quarter of a year, every 3 months. So very common. Those are the air conditioning rules that you should take a look at. Then I'm gonna say any other rules related to appliances. So I've also seen while scrolling through property listings that there's some landlords who will who will say that you're only allowed to use the washing machine once a week or twice a week. So another thing to be mindful of. And next thing is visitor policy. So always ask your landlord, are friends allowed to visit? Are they allowed to stay overnight? Now if you're renting out the whole apartment, it's up to you. You can have whoever you want, but sometimes you might be living in a room and the rest of the apartment is occupied by the landlord and family. So in that case, of course, it's going to be a lot of oversight from them, and it's your responsibility to ask them and make sure that it's okay with them for if you're intending to have friends over. Some landlords tend to be really strict because they don't like it, so that's something to look out for and just check that. Then cooking rules. So this is why I was really specifying having access to hawker centers, food courts, and just food in general, because there's a lot of cooking related rules in Singapore. Now the first one is on your rental contract, especially if you're doing the kind of thing where you're only renting a room and not the whole apartment, you might see this term called no cooking, self-explanatory, do not cook, or light cooking allowed, which also has very specific allowances. Basically it means when you're allowed to light cook, you're only allowed to boil water, make noodles, use a microwave, and prepare simple meals. So for us, if you think that I'm going to be able to cook all of my mom's dishes and every single thing that I want at home, that's not the case, because light cooking absolutely does not mean deep frying, heavy spice cooking, extensive meal preparation. It's a big no. So this is something that you should be aware of when you enter into a contract. You might even be able to negotiate it with your landlord, but ensure that this is mentioned in your contract. Don't take it on a verbal agreement basis. Then so also very important, the deposit. Typically the deposit is going to be 1 month's deposit, or even 2 months if you have a really long lease. And mostly landlords do give you your deposit back. I'm going to say it becomes much easier if you have an agent to advocate for you to ensure that they actually return your deposit, but they are going to take a deposit, so be aware of that. Okay, part 4, which is about the best areas to live in Singapore. So there is a positive relationship. The better the area is, the more lively an area is, the more expensive it's gonna be. So the rental prices are really gonna vary dramatically depending on the location, and the expensive areas are gonna be Orchard, River Valley, Tanjong Pagar, Marina Bay, Holland Village, and Bukit Timah. So if you know anything about the Orchard area, well, that's basically central Singapore. It's where all your huge shopping malls are, like Orchard Iron, Takashimaya, Somerset, all of those places. It's like a huge hub of activity and also offices. And then of course the Marina Bay area is where you have MBS, the Marina Bay Sands. So it's a very touristy area, and with all of that comes a huge hike up in prices. So be prepared. Then you have mid-range areas. So these are going to be around central Singapore, like Queenstown, Commonwealth, Red Hill, Clementi, Bishan, Toa Payoh. I personally lived in Commonwealth. It was fairly central, it was amazing, and I had very good access to all the up and happening areas. So with a country having such an amazing transport system, I'm gonna say you don't have to be where the bus is. You can be a little bit further and you can commute just as well. So don't stress it. And I'm gonna insert a heat map of property rental prices just so that you get an idea about how the prices vary. Central and South Singapore, very expensive because you're paying for convenience. The outskirts like north and east of Singapore, not that expensive or kind of reasonable, but you're gonna have to commute. I'm gonna say that the commute from the northmost region of Singapore even towards the east of Singapore, like think about Changi, around 1.5 hours, so depending on what you're willing to travel. And I'm gonna say if you find yourself in a position where budget allows you only to be in some of the outskirts of Singapore, don't stress it. Public transport is amazing. There is air conditioning. You'll be fine. It's okay. So the affordable areas would be, like I said, so north, west, east, like Jurong West, Boon Lay, Woodlands, Ishan, Sengkang, Punggol. So like I said, longer the commute, lower your rent is going to be. And yeah, so to sum it up, my recommendation is prioritize connectivity by MRT, which is Singapore's rail network, the trains. Prioritize this above even the bus network, because sometimes buses, they can be a little finicky, but with the MRT system, I can guarantee you that you can, take a train from your closest MRT, take a stop to one of the, many line connections, and all the lines in Singapore are really well connected. So genuinely, you're going to be fine. And a 30-minute ride in Singapore is so much easier than, even sometimes a 10-minute ride here in India. Now let's get past the listening and let's do some of the doing. So how do you find accommodation in Singapore? So the main platforms that you're going to use would be online, and they're going to be Property Guru, 99co, rentinsingapore.com, and these are like websites. But besides this, you can also be on social media like Facebook rental groups. Amazing. You can just go onto Facebook and there's so many groups of people just actually doing stuff and looking for stuff, and you'll find really specific groups too. Like you can find Indians in Singapore, Indian students in Singapore, or Singapore international student house rental. Very, very specific. And actually, once you get your university acceptance, you can even type in like NUS students Singapore, or let's say you can even type in like Indian students SMU Singapore. You can even look specifically for HDBs, you can look specifically for condominiums, but always verify the listing and at least do a video viewing. Never go in blindly, just don't do it. Besides that, you're also going to have Telegram student communities, and your university should, by the time all the students are in, create like an Instagram group or a Facebook group, so you'll be able to know who your cohort is, and ideally you can reach out to them and be like, I'm also going to be attending said university, this is my budget, I would like to live here, so do you want to look for housing together? That brings me to part 6, which is how do you find roommates? Like I said, it's gonna be, I think, easier if you know the person. Like let's say you and your friend know that you're going to go to Singapore to study. Of course, reach out to them. Parents, friends. Easy way, right? There's a trust factor involved. But besides that, if your university makes a group chat with all the incoming students, then you have another avenue of, knowing people who are going to be going there. So that helps too. But a few strategies would be maybe look on LinkedIn. Nowadays, even high schoolers have LinkedIn. So, and a lot of them, make like LinkedIn announcement posts like, I'm ecstatic to share that I've been accepted to XYZ University. And you can definitely reach out to them and see if they're interested in, looking for a place with you. You can also join WhatsApp groups, Telegram groups. Besides this, the site that I mentioned, rentinsingapore.com, you have this little option to also post, upload a post saying that this is me, these are my stats, and I'm looking for roommates. Like if I were to create a profile, I would be like, my name's Alexia, my nationality, my age, optional where you go to uni, and you also write in your rental preferences, like I only want to live with females, or I only want to live with men, or doesn't matter to you. Also mention your must-haves, like this is my rental budget, I can't go above that, or I really only want to look at places which are close to, let's say, the central area or whatever. So that comes to the next section, should you use an agent? So this is my opinion, I'm gonna say yes, because they really made my life a lot easier as an international student, as an outsider coming into Singapore. So I'm gonna heavily recommend getting a trusted, reliable agent if this is your first time renting in Singapore. And the reason why is that an agent knows the Singapore rental market. They know better than you at this point the transport hubs, how commuting will be, where the amenities are. They also, because there's a trust factor involved and they're more local than you are, clearly, they can vouch for you to the landlord, being like, yeah, I know this person, I've been speaking to them, they're very tidy, very clean, they're not going to cause any troubles for you. And as part of the trust factor, a lot of the landlords that you're going to find, they're going to be kind of sometimes Indian also, like Singaporean Indian, or they're going to be Singaporean Chinese, Malay. So sometimes your agent can actually speak to them in their own language, and that makes all the difference in trying to build that trust factor, getting a relationship going. So having an agent in that regard is really useful. They also negotiate your rent for you, right? Like if you found this apartment and you really like it, your agent can scope out for you whether this is a good price to pay, whether they can bring it a little down, whether this is your best bet, and also keeping in consideration that who's gonna do the viewings for you. Remember I said like doing a viewing is very important. So when you have an agent who's on the ground for you, they can actually take you through a virtual viewing, see how that works out. That's really why I would definitely recommend an agent. And typically the agent's fee is 1 month's rental fee that you're gonna have to pay to the agent. And your agents will also be able to spot like some issues that you might not know about, like some very specific issues which you don't have the intuition to know about. Or let's say that you're just looking at a room and it seems okay, your agent might actually be like, oh, this seems worn out, so are you the landlord really going to charge XYZ amount? Or, well, that's the bathroom, but how is this going to happen? They can point out flaws really well, and that really helps you get the best deal possible. But get an agent, although always verify the identity of this agent. And the way that you do this is your agent should have a registration number with the Council for Estate Agencies, CEA. So what you do is you can verify them yourselves. Typically when you get in touch with an agent, on their WhatsApp profile they always have their CEA registration number listed out. So you copy paste this number onto the CEA registration website and make sure that it's approved, it's active, they haven't been suspended for any reason. That's how you go about it. And yeah, never skip that step. If I had to summarize everything into a few key points, number one, disclaimer, these are what I would do, and it's also some things that I practiced and what led me to have a very comfortable experience. So this is what worked for me, and maybe it'll help you too, maybe not, but here it is. Number one, prioritize your metro MRT access over everything else, even more than buses, because It's a better network, it's faster. Also, it rains a lot in Singapore, and you'll be drier if you're in an MRT than in a bus. Then my second tip is going to be, don't underestimate HDBs, because they're really a very nice option, especially if you want to budget a little more and have more money set aside for excursions, for fun, all of those things. And like I said, 80% of the Singaporean population live in HDBs, so you're living a very authentic experience, so you'll be fine. And if you're worried about security, it's really not that big of a concern. But the safety is unlike anything that I've ever felt before anywhere. And even as I've been progressing in my journey, I've been to France now, I've been to Korea, there's truly nothing quite like the safety and the serenity in Singapore. So third tip, read every single clause in your contract, and also clarify the cooking limitations, visitors, utilities. What about the air conditioning? Always make sure that you read all the fine print and are completely on board with everything that you decide to sign a yes to. Then I'm gonna say tip 4 is start searching early. And I'll tell you why. So realistically, the most openings for housing open up 1.5 months to 1 to 2 days before the move-in date. So the serious searching will happen in that 1.5 to 0 day window from your actual move-in date. But I'm gonna recommend that you actually open these property websites like Property Guru, 99Co, 4 to 5 months in advance, so that you familiarize yourself with what is the standard that these houses are being sold at, what are the expectations. And it's basically so that you can reconcile your expectations to the ground level reality of, in this budget, this is what you're gonna get, and this is something that you're gonna have to be on board with, like the light cooking. It's very common, it's something that maybe you're gonna have to adjust. So that should give you plenty of time to reconcile the two. So research 4 to 5 months in advance. Like, I remember I got my acceptance in February and I was set to join in September. I had begun searching right the next day after I got my acceptance, and it was a little futile because there weren't any openings available, but it gave me a really good idea about what I could expect, about what I should tell my parents to anticipate. And so we had a lot of discussions about, well, in the beginning I really wanted to have some place where I would be allowed to cook, but I quickly realized that I had to abandon that fantasy. So it's just that you're prepared, and then like I said, you get serious about it 1.5 months to 3-5 days. That's when you should lock in your choices. Then I'm going to say, yeah, this part is in tandem to the story that I was telling you earlier. Consider using an agent, especially if you're really lost. They will charge you 1 month's rent, but you'll have, in most cases, a good experience. And take this with a grain of salt, because not all agents are the same. But the reason that I'm speaking so highly is because I feel as though I had an amazing agent who did the most for me. Then consider living near a hawker center, because like I said, you might have to let go of certain things, and maybe as a student your priorities are not just spending time cooking. So it's always nice to have a little bit of flexibility. And my final tip is budget realistically. Singapore is an amazing city, but it's not cheap. So hopefully you can keep all of this in mind, and you can start right now, start looking. I know there's quite a few of you who are planning to go to Singapore the next month, so hopefully with this guide you have a better idea of how to go about things now. That's actually all that I have to say. So I hope that you found this guide helpful. It's long, but it's truly everything that I wanted to cover, and it's things that I wish someone had told me when I was doing my research. So I hope you took away something from this video, and I wish you all the very best in your own search for your accommodation. If you have any questions, queries, doubts, feel free to type them out in the chat, and I will do my best to help you out. So that's all. Thank you for watching. If you made it till here, leave a comment, and I will see you whenever next. And all the best with the search. Bye.